Today I have a number of topics for you, but Brexit will definitely not stay away, because the first comprehensive Brexit review that the European Parliament wants to discuss and decide on next week is 120 pages long. It wasn't as bad as feared, but bad enough. Almost 4 years after Brexit, the EU has drawn up its first comprehensive interim assessment of the separate paths. And the chairman of the two leading committees for foreign and trade policy, that's David McAllister and Bernd Lange, assessed the facts collected by 12 committees of the European Parliament from the respective specialist areas as largely positive. However, a look at the 172 main conclusions of the 120-page report conveys the picture of the European Union and the United Kingdom continuing to drift apart. The basic finding is, as expected, Great Britain's withdrawal from the EU has had a negative impact on trade flows between the EU and the United Kingdom, and additional costs were incurred on both sides. When presenting the report, which is to be decided in plenary session next week, the two committee chairmen made it clear that their positive mood was apparently influenced by the fact that they feared things would be much worse. They referred, for example, to the willingness of previous British governments to repeal thousands of laws that were based on EU law, which hasn't happened. London has distanced itself from this, just as it did from its original refusal to organize a reliable border control regiment. Until spring of this year, new disputes arose again and again over the Northern Ireland Protocol as part of the Brexit agreements. The problem behind this is that there should be no new border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom still, and the Republic of Ireland, which is a member of the EU. But that means that goods that do not meet EU standards can also enter the EU unhindered. And with the Westminster framework, the Windsor framework, Brussels and London came to an agreement that divides the flow of goods into different categories. And trade expert Lange reported how he was able to personally inspect the clearance. The EU now has full access to the British customs system and can identify indications for random checks. And there is now a rather positive general mood, as reported by Lange. And Lange answered questions about a possible wholesale undermining of EU regulations on British-Irish-European trade by pointing out that the samples in the other European ports also only affected 1% of the goods arriving. But he says we are not naive. In view of the results, the Conservative politician McAllister also emphasized that the mood had brightened significantly. However, that does not mean that other EU member states that were considering following the British example of leaving the EU can now feel encouraged. The entire process had a very chilling effect for them. In addition, countries willing to leave are likely to have to deal with the sum of the negative effects as summarized in the balance sheet. Using dozens of examples, EU observers repeatedly expressed their concern about the extent of the negative development. For example, about the many EU citizens who were refused entry to the UK, or the high visa fees and their lengthy and cumbersome procedures. Even the au pair sector suffered massively from Brexit. Scottish universities deeply regretted the absence of students from EU countries. And Parliament is calling on the Commission to improve coordination in numerous areas, from environmental protection standards to the regulation of financial services to electricity trading. MEPs also dread the thought of having to renegotiate fishing quotas every year, and they are calling for quick creative solutions to avert punitive tariffs on electric cars from January 1st. But we don't only have Brexit today. The issue of Rwanda is also not yet off the table for the British. Court rulings can't seem to stop the British government. In order to be able to deport people to Rwanda, Prime Minister Sunak would even change the law, although the African country is not a safe third country, as I said for a long time. Despite another defeat in court, the British government is sticking to its plans to deport migrants to Rwanda. After a ruling by the Supreme Court, Prime Minister Sunak announced that he wanted to launch a new agreement with Rwanda and have the East African state declared a safe country by means of an emergency law. Sunak also announced that he would want to override a possible new ruling by the European Court of Human Rights, which is not a part of the EU, by the way. In a speech to the House of Commons, Sunak said he was prepared to change our laws and rethink international relations if the domestic legal framework or international agreements conflict with the British government's Rwanda plans. With a view to a possible new ECHR ruling against the plans, Sunak said he would not allow a foreign court to block these flights. In the event of an intervention by the ECHR against the express wish of Parliament, he is ready to do what is necessary to allow the flights to take off. On Wednesday last week, the British Supreme Court agreed with an appeals court ruling that the deportations of migrants from third countries to Rwanda are unlawful and violate international treaties. In the 56-page decision, the 5-judge Supreme Court panel upheld the appeal court's June ruling that Rwanda was not a safe third country. There is therefore a risk that asylum seekers sent there could be forcibly deported to another country where they could face persecution. Following the Supreme Court's decision, Sunak said his government had already been working on a new deal with Rwanda, which would now be finalized in light of today's ruling, as he put it. The British government said that in a joint conversation, Sunak and Rwandan President Paul Kagame reaffirmed their determined commitment to a workable migration partnership. The opposition Labour Party accused the Conservative Prime Minister of not having a serious plan to curb the dangerous crossings of migrants from France across the English Channel to Great Britain. The government in Rwanda had previously declared that it would accept the British court's decision. However, we disagree with the assessment that Rwanda is not a safe third country for asylum seekers and refugees, emphasized the government spokesman Yolanda Makolo. The country is fulfilling its international obligations, and the exemplary treatment of refugees has been recognized by the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and other organizations. Well, the British refugee charity Refugee Council welcomed the court decision, calling it a victory for the rights of men, women and children who simply want to be safe. Great Britain had already concluded an agreement with Rwanda under the former Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson to fly asylum seekers of all origins who had arrived in Britain irregularly. This should deter people from making the dangerous crossings across the English Channel. Opponents described the plans as inhumane and costly, and not to forget, unlawful. The implementation of the project has so far failed, and a flight with migrants to the East African country planned for June 22 was cancelled at short notice following a ruling by the ECHR. The British government is under pressure from record numbers of migrants crossing the English Channel. This year alone, more than 27,000 people came to Great Britain this way, and last year there were almost 46,000. But another topic for today is another creative idea from the British government, but not as controversial. Because in Great Britain, the average construction time of 14 years for new electricity networks is to be halved, and this should be made palatable to citizens with a lot of money. Because the British government wants to make it easier for citizens to agree to new electricity pylons and substations in their area, and thereby significantly speed up the construction of such projects. And Finance Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt wants to give these people discounts on their energy bills in the future, as the ministry announced on Sunday. The project also includes other measures to accelerate projects and could save a household about £10,000 over a period of 10 years. I hope the calculation is correct. And the government hopes that planning reforms will halve the current average construction time of those 14 years for new electricity networks. The current duration is significantly longer than in other major economies and is slowing down investment in Great Britain. Treasury sources said expanding the power grid would unlock global investment for Britain and bring improvements for people across the country. In the end, there's energy security at low energy costs, as they say. The plan is part of a statement that Han plans to submit on November 22nd. The minister is also expected to expand existing incentives for business investment. The government hopes that its plan will give the stagnating British economy a boost and thus make gains ahead of next year's elections. The opposition Labour Party is well ahead of the ruling Conservatives in opinion polls at the moment. But I started with Brexit, and obviously Brexit needs some more space in this video still. Reform UK's decision to reintroduce the Brexit Party moniker stems from a strategic calculation to capitalize on the Conservative Party's ongoing struggles and regain relevance among voters who still hold strong Eurosceptic sentiments as here. The party believes that by re-emerging as Reform UK the Brexit Party, it can reignite the enthusiasm of Brexiteers and attract more support from those who feel disillusioned with the current Conservative leadership. And there are indeed some key reasons why Reform UK is revisiting its Brexit-focused identity. The Conservative Party is facing significant internal turmoil and public disapproval, providing an opportunity for Reform UK to step into the void and appeal to voters who are unhappy with the current state of affairs, you would say. And the party's rebranding aims to tap into this growing dissatisfaction and position itself as a viable alternative to the Conservatives. And while the initial Brexit fervour has subsided, there remains a significant portion of the electorate who still hold strong Eurosceptic views and believe that the UK's departure from the EU have not gone far enough. And Reform UK's emphasis on Brexit aims to resonate with these voters and tap into their discontent with the current Brexit arrangements by the Conservative government. The party aims to reclaim the ownership of the Brexit debate, reforming it as an ongoing struggle for a truly sovereign Britain. And by positioning itself as the champion of Brexit, Reform UK hopes to attract more support from those who feel that the Conservative Party has abandoned its commitment to Brexit. And while Brexit remains central to the party's identity, Reform UK is not solely focused on the single issue anymore. The party says they recognize the need to diversify its appeal and address a wider range of concerns among voters. However, by reintroducing the Brexit Party moniker, the party can maintain its core identity while also signaling its intention to tackle other issues. Intention, though. The implementation of Brexit has been far more complex and challenging than many had anticipated, leading to widespread frustration among voters. And Reform UK is attempting to channel this frustration by positioning itself as a champion of Brexit and promising to deliver a more effective and what they call a fulfilling Brexit outcome. Reform UK's core ideology aligns closely with the traditional Conservative Party, placing a strong emphasis on free markets, limited government and national sovereignty. But by connecting or reconnecting with this traditional Conservative base, the party hopes to regain lost ground and establish itself as a viable alternative to the Conservatives. And the decision to revert to the Brexit Party name is a bold move that could either revitalize the party or alienate its more moderate supporters. However, given the current political climate and the perceived weaknesses of the Conservative Party, Reform UK believes that this strategic shift is necessary to recapture its former momentum and challenge the Conservative hegemony in British politics. Overall, Reform UK's rebranding as Reform UK the Brexit Party is a tactical maneuver to capitalize on the Conservative Party's woes and broaden its appeal among Eurosceptic voters. The party hopes to regain relevance amidst the current political climate and emerge as a strong challenger to the Conservatives in the future. But indeed, Brexit not only is important because of this party name stuff. There's other stuff here, because David Cameron's appointment as British Foreign Minister may have raised eyebrows in EU capitals, but the Union sees the return of the man who triggered the Brexit referendum more as a continued defrosting of relations than a lurch back to the turbulent times. As Prime Minister, Cameron called the referendum on European Union membership in 2016, although he campaigned for Britain to remain in the EU. And he quit hours after Britain voted narrowly to leave, vacating his parliamentary seat a couple of months later even. Welcome back, David Cameron. That's what Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said in a post on X, this thing formerly known as Twitter, soon after Cameron was appointed as Foreign Secretary in a cabinet reshuffle by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The French, German, Dutch and Irish foreign ministers sent online congratulations, and Sweden's top diplomat said he looked forward to working with Cameron, a centrist conservative who was Britain's Prime Minister from 2010 to 2016. One EU diplomat said it was a sign of a continued normalizing of EU-UK relations since Britain left the EU in 2020 that the new foreign minister was not an ardent Brexiteer. Let's hope this is a consolidation of pragmatism over ideology in our relations. Regardless of past mistakes, this might be a good thing, is what the diplomat said. And another EU diplomat said Cameron's absence from politics for 7 years meant he was partly an unknown quantity, but felt he was more a pragmatist than not. And while the European Commission declined to comment, Maroš Šefčovič, its vice president who oversees the European Union's relation with Britain, sent congratulations to Cameron's predecessor James Cleverly, who has become Home Secretary now. Cleverly's term as Foreign Minister under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak led to kind of a U-turn in post-Brexit EU-UK ties, thawing from stubborn, bitter standoffs to pragmatic negotiations yielding results. I just say Windsor Framework again. This year, the two have struck a deal to simplify shipments from mainland Britain to Northern Ireland while avoiding a hard border with neighbour EU member Ireland, and signed a cooperation pact on financial services, a memorandum of understanding only though, and agreed Britain will rejoin the EU's flagship Horizon Scientific Research Programme. Britain and the EU are now pursuing a deal to avoid imposing tariffs on their trade in electric vehicles at the same time. And the EU and Britain have also cooperated closely within NATO and the G7 on sanctions against Russia. Indeed, the EU's focus on geopolitical tensions and its green transition means bilateral ties with Britain have quite dropped down on the agenda. And Šefčovič credited this past year working with Cleverly with putting EU-UK relations back on track, adding that he looked forward to continuing this work with Cameron. But unfortunately, I also have to bring a very unpleasant topic, but I couldn't leave that out, because physical assault, lewdness, derogatory language, there appears to be a toxic atmosphere for women in the British Ministry of Defence, and dozens have now written an incendiary letter. In Britain, 60 senior civil servants wrote a confidential letter describing a hostile and toxic culture at the Defence Ministry, as The Guardian reports. Accordingly, the women describe numerous examples of sexual assault and harassment by their male colleagues. And according to the report, the letter was sent to the ministry's state secretary over a month ago, along with anonymous reports from women about their personal experiences. The statements describe, among other things, that women were hit on, groped, and repeatedly touched while working in the defense ministry. The work culture would be hostile to women as equal and respected partners. The newspaper describes some of the witness statements, and there is supposed to be a group of officers who jointly maintain an Excel spreadsheet in which they rate women based on their appearance and their assessment of how they are in bed. A witness reports that a high-ranking ministry official turned to a colleague before an evening event and asked whether anal sex was a suitable topic for a speech. And the women also report specific physical attacks. An employee stationed abroad was repeatedly touched on the lower back and legs by a high-ranking officer, but the alleged perpetrator was not punished for this. The women write that they are talked about in conferences and are exposed to derogatory language and unwanted attention. They experience sexual harassment in the form of intrusive looks, sexualized comments, and comments about what they wear, how they look, and how they smell. The groups of men staring at them are terrible. That's what one woman says, describing her experience while walking through one of the main hallways of the ministry. And another witness said an officer told her that there were only two types of women in defense: the sluts who were useful and the mothers who were completely useless. The previous handling of such allegations in the ministry is also criticized. Reports from women were generally downplayed rather than listened to, and the ministry complaint system was known to be inadequate. The women write that they have tried for years to gently and diplomatically improve the toxic culture from within. However, their letter is only an excerpt from a large number of worrying experiences. However, State Secretary David Williams responded immediately to the letter from the 60 high-ranking female employees. According to The Guardian, he responded on October 5th that he was disappointed and appalled by the reports. The women could be sure that they will be taken seriously and will be responded to. A spokesman for Defense Secretary Grant Shapps said after the letter became known that there should be no place for this type of behavior from the 1970s in the Ministry of Defense. The minister himself, however, has not yet made a personal statement. But there's more trouble in Britain, and this time it's trouble for Keir Starmer in Parliament. So far, it has been all full steam ahead for British Labour Party leader Keir Starmer, and for many months the Labour Party had a lead of more than 20 percentage points over the Tories. But on Wednesday evening, Starmer faced his biggest challenge since taking the helm of the party 3.5 years ago. During a motion put forward by the Scottish National Party, the SNP, calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and the vote on it, 8 ministers in the Labour shadow cabinet did not follow the strict factional constraints and thus resigned from their positions. A total of 58 of the 198 Labour MPs, that's a little less than a third of the Labour group, did not vote with their own party, but instead voted for the SNP's proposal. And many of the rebels were MPs from the far left wing of the party, some of them former parliamentarians close to ex-Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, but also MPs who represented constituencies with a higher Muslim population. The 8 MPs who have since resigned from the shadow cabinet were Naz Shah from Bradford, Yasmin Kershi from Bolton South East, Afzal Khan from Manchester Gorton, Jess Phillips from Birmingham Yardley, Paula Barker from Liverpool Wavertree, Sarah Owen and Rachel Hopkins from Luton, and Andy Slaughter from London Hammersmith. Shadow Secretaries of State Dan Carden of Liverpool and Mary Foy of Durham are also no longer in service. Despite the support of Labour MPs, the SNP lost the vote for a ceasefire, with 293 voting against and just 125 in favour. At least 183 MPs voted for Starmer's own proposal for humanitarian ceasefire, more than for the SNP's proposal, but there were also 290 votes against. The Labour leader regretted that MPs from his party did not support his proposal. And leadership means doing the right thing, he said. He stressed that the conflict began with Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th, and no government would not react after such an incident. All previous attempts to limit the conflict or to pay little attention to it have so far failed. In his proposal, Starmer expressed the desire for an end to the violence between Gaza and Israel, as the conflict had already caused too much suffering and too many dead civilians, including several thousand children in Gaza. He condemned Hamas terrorist attacks, called for the release of all hostages and confirmed Israel's right to self-defense. He also called for the protection of hospitals and the lifting of supply bans. The proposal recognized Israel's previous humanitarian ceasefires, but said they would have to last longer. A credible diplomatic and political process aimed at peace and a two-state solution must begin as soon as possible. But apparently that didn't go far enough for the 58 Labour MPs who voted for the SNP. Nashar, one of them, said in the Commons debate that it was wrong not to speak of Hamas terrorist attacks, but it would be equally wrong to be blind to the suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians who are being murdered every hour. Not my words. And Jess Phillips, who is considered to be close to Starmer, wrote in a letter to the Labour Party leader that she must stand behind her constituency and believes that the current military actions further undermine the peace and security of everyone in the Middle East region and would endanger the peace there. The pressure on the Labour leadership is growing indeed, and Starmer recently expressed himself vaguely in a radio interview, leaving room for a lot of interpretation. Some took his statements to mean that he considered Israel's food and water blockade of the Gaza Strip in the name of the right of self-defense to be appropriate. Although he subsequently emphasized that this was not what he meant, numerous local representatives left the party on the grounds that Labour's position on the Middle East conflict could not be reconciled with their conscience. In the northern English city of Burnley alone, 11 local representatives resigned, and in Oxford, Labour even lost its majority because of the resignations. Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawar and the mayors of Manchester and London, Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan, also spoke out in favour of a ceasefire, contrary to the position of the party leadership. British Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told the House of Commons that calling for a ceasefire would mean a green light for Hamas to carry out more terror attacks. Margaret Beckett, former Foreign Secretary under Tony Blair, also stated that a ceasefire would only stop Israel. She thought Starmer's suggestion of a purely humanitarian ceasefire was the best idea. Within a week, both Labour leaders Starmer and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak are now facing challenges in their own camp. Sunak had to put up with toxic criticism from his former Home Secretary Suella Braverman and from the right wing of the Tories, and there are already the first motions of no confidence against him. So there was a lot going on since my last video, and so I had quite a selection of topics here, and I'm quite looking forward what it will be tomorrow. And if you want to see another video right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.